This morning about from content magic from chatbots to, anyway, I've tried it the third time now, the AI-driven future of Drupal. So let's go ahead and get started. So for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Martin Anderson-Klutz. I am a principal solutions engineer at Acquia. Last year I served as the events recipe track lead for the Starshot initiative, and I'm also on the Talking Drupal podcast as the Module of the Week correspondent. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can find me as mandclu on all of the Drupal and social channels. And today is my birthday. So let's get started. I'm not going to bother explaining what AI is. I feel like probably if you're in this room, you already know. This is, I think, an interesting statistic. So a couple of years ago, the IMF estimated that 40% of jobs globally, or 60% of jobs in advanced economies, will be impacted by the growing adoption of AI. I feel like if they were going to do this estimate today, those numbers would be much higher. But it sort of begs the question, who in this room is worried about AI stealing their jobs? Only a couple. Okay, that's pretty good. I remember hearing somebody say that in order to replace developers, customers will need to clearly state the requirements, which means we're safe. So it does sort of lead into the question then, like, what are the things that we can be doing to get the best output from our interactions with AI? So there's this field called prompt engineering, and I will take a moment here to call out, there was a session in this room in the previous time slot, something like treat AI as your assistant, not as your author. And there was a lot of really good, more detailed information about like specific prompt structures and like very detailed things about like one of the things I've heard a couple of people say is when, as part of your prompt, say, ask me clarifying questions so that AI won't sort of guess or hallucinate, that it can actually come back and get clarification. So those are the kinds of things like you want to be able to be very clear, provide it enough instruction in terms of exactly what you're looking for, give it enough context. You can give it examples, so to say, like, here's the kind of thing that I want, and that will help it to sort of, give you exactly what you're looking for, including things like the specific format. So here's an example, actually calling out those different sections. So saying, the format of what you want to get back, giving it the reference that it should go by, the actual request of what you want it to do, and then giving it some framing. So in this case, somebody giving it some background about their dog that is the information that AI is going to use to write a song based on Holy by Justin Bieber. So as an example, one of the things that I did is I told AI to write a Shakespearean sonnet about the beauty and ease of use of the Drupal CMS. And so it went ahead and did that and did a pretty credible job. But then I thought it'd be nice if it actually mentioned Driegs in there. And so, again, the more that you give it the specifics around what you're doing, the more it will sort of, give you a result that aligns with exactly what you're looking for. Now there's this newer concept of retrieval augmented generation, which is instead of you specifically providing all of the contexts that it needs to use, basically saying, go out and find this kind of information and then use that as the context. And so that can be very powerful, particularly if there's a lot more than you want to provide, or maybe the information that it should be using is going to be changing over time. This can be a very effective strategy, again, to get the more specific results that you may be looking for. And then one of the big topics that's been, a lot of excitement around it this year is this idea of agentic AI. So an AI agent really has a lot more kind of autonomy. Oftentimes you can ask it for something that is sort of almost like a bigger project that it should do. It will actually break that down into tasks. It can delegate those into sort of like sub-agents. There are some tools that can generate, hundreds, even thousands of agents that they call a swarm, and so you can actually do some pretty massive amounts of work kind of in parallel very fast. Can be obviously very expensive if you're using that much compute. But by sort of telling it like what are the inputs that you should use, potentially even using like different kinds of media. So you can see here like camera, text, audio, sensors. What are some of the different sort of like knowledge bases, even like tools that it should be using? And then, again, sort of spelling out what are the actions that it should take, whether it should be like manipulating a database or outputting some kind of a document, those kinds of things as well. But a fundamental principle that I think everybody should be thinking about as they use AI tools is this idea of human in the loop. So I like to think of AI as almost like an intern. So in the same way that you wouldn't hire somebody right out of school and then give them access to your production database, with AI, you should be have a person who's sort of, at each stage validating that what it's trying to do is the right thing, and being that sort of final check before an email goes out to your boss or something gets published on the website, right? Like, you definitely want to have those sort of human eyes to make sure that there's a level of common sense that's applied that oftentimes is where AI can fall short. So now let's bring it back to Drupal specifically. What are some of the useful things that you can do with AI in Drupal? So certainly, we've seen examples of text generation. That was actually one of the first examples that we had as far as like AI integration in Drupal. There are various ways you can sort of augment text that you might have manually written. So you could do things like summarize text or translate text or change the tone of text, and we'll see some examples of that as we go through. You can also have AI generate images for you. So again, you could provide it, let's say, the text of an article and say, generate an image that, applies to this, and have it do that automatically. And there are ways to structure that so that as a content author, it could be, let's say, a single click to do that, but behind the scenes, you've got different tools that are actually generating a very robust prompt automatically, but again, to the end user, that can feel like sort of a simple one-click operation. There are definitely tools for site building, and again, we'll see an example of that as we go through. There are ways to use AI for things like content moderation. So you could have AI in, let's say, a site that accepts user-generated comments to check for spammy content, or for things that have too much anger, or some of those kinds of things, as well as some of the agentic capabilities and other things. I mean, one of the things that's really exciting about AI in Drupal is that there is so much innovation going on, and we'll touch a little bit more on that as we go through. So specifically within Drupal, there's one project. It's actually called Drupal AI. So drupal.org/project/AI, and definitely that's where, if you're wanting to get started using AI with Drupal, that's where you should begin. So it actually came from a variety of different projects. There were a variety of people that, because AI had sprung up so quickly and there was so much excitement about it, there were lots of different projects that had, some degrees of, different capabilities, but also some overlap. And one of the things that I think is amazing about Drupal as a community is that everybody was able to sort of put aside kind of their little private fiefdoms and sort of agree to all consolidate their work together, and develop something that's extremely powerful, very full featured, as opposed to having sort of like a number of things that were sort of almost fully baked, competing with each other. So now we have this single Drupal AI project that has a variety of capabilities in terms of CK editor integration, being able to suggest some of those different ways of enhancing existing content. Now having inline triggers, so being able to sort of have buttons within the interface, and again, we'll see an example of that. LLM abstraction layers, so the Drupal AI project currently works with, the last number I heard was 22 different LLMs, so extremely powerful and versatile in that way. Being able to work with sort of the ECA and some of the really exciting tools that exist there, site builders, Chatbot, and more. So I thought it would be useful to sort of provide a bit of a conceptual framework in terms of how that sort of broad set of capabilities really works, at a bit of a deeper level. So there's an interaction layer, which is really sort of like what triggers off some kind of an AI process. So it could be automated, like when you save a note. It could be something that's in the UI, like a button. There could be sort of a dedicated UI interface, so doing some kind of like an LLM chat. There's vector search, a variety of other things. Then below that, we have more of an orchestration layer, and here's where you can start to inject some business logic. So you could use tools like ECA or AI automators to sort of build in more complexity in terms of the thing that it's doing, beyond just saying like, here's the prompt, go fetch me the answer, but start to do things like chaining. And then the LLM abstraction layer is where it can map specific kinds of media that it might need to work with, so beyond just prompts or text, but images, video, and so on. Potentially using different kinds of retrievers or other kinds of specialized tools to then interact with the different LLMs that can provide those kinds of either accepting those inputs or providing back the kind of transformation that you're looking for. So with that being said, let's dive in and actually see some of these tools in action. So here's an example of Drupal CMS that I set up. I went ahead and gave it a body field. I put in some example copy. And now maybe we want to generate a summary, because we can see at the top there is no existing summary. And so with a click of a button, it'll go out to AI. And now if we go back to the top, we can see it's generated one for us. And again, there's a principle that you'll see through all these tools, again, that idea of human in the loop. So, it's bringing back the summary, but as the content author, I have the ability to say, maybe I want to tweak this a little bit. Maybe I think what it's come back with is completely off base, and I just want to regenerate it. But having that person as the sort of final arbiter before it actually gets saved to the database is something that you really want to stay to as the guiding principle. So same way we could say, let's go ahead and add an image, and notice it needs the alt text, but we have the ability, again, with a single click to have it go ahead and generate the alt text. So it's coming back with something that's maybe a bit on the generic side, but for now we'll say that's okay. And in a similar way, we can have it go ahead and generate some tags. And notice here that it is coming back, it's recognizing that one of the suggestions that came back is actually already in the database as a tag, but for some of the newer ones, it's going ahead and adding those new as additional taxonomy terms in the database. And the other thing that I thought would be worth showing here is that in the configuration, you as a site builder have the ability to define what's the actual prompt that is going to go to the LLM, and in this case just saying, this is a fairly simple prompt, but you could give it a lot more context. So if you have a site that is based around like medical technology, then you can sort of weave some of that nuance in there so that when it's generating those, it knows to be more specific in terms of the kinds of suggestions that it's going to come back with. But again, that idea of sort of developing prompt engineering, I think, is really a critical skill as we move into this age where so much of everything that we're going to be doing is infused with, AI. I think developing that understanding of what are the kinds of information you need to be able to provide the AI model to get the response back that you're looking for, I think is going to be a really critical skill for the future.
So in this example, if you weren't totally happy with the summary, would you just manually update it, or would you feed it through another AI loop, another go around?
So if I as a content author wasn't happy with the summary that I got back as an example, if I was completely unhappy with it, I would probably just try generating it again to see if it would get better. Sometimes you might say what it came back with was 85% okay, and then I'm just going to tweak the parts that I don't like. I have worked with AI tools where I tried a few times and never got back anything that I thought was close, and then at that point I'm like, okay, well, you could sort of adjust the prompt. One of the things that I've heard is a good sort of practice to follow is, as you're using AI tools, particularly for things that you're going to need to do again and again, is to actually keep track of the prompts that you use so that you can sort of see when I need to do this thing, this is a good way to structure the prompt. And then that way you can sort of iterate on those prompts over time. But there will also be some times where it may just be faster to create something manually.
But in this example, how would you iterate the prompt? Externally or internally?
Well, so going back to this example here, you could give it more detail to the prompt, because this one obviously is very simple. But yeah, and most of the things that you'll see in Drupal AI have that ability to sort of modify the prompts. It'll give ones out of the box that will usually do a pretty credible job. But again, because you might have a website that has a very specialized kind of content that it's working with, the ability to go in and configure those to your specific use case, I think, is really invaluable.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Who do you define as the content author in this process?
Who do I define as the content author in the process? I would say the person basically creating in Drupalism, the node. I'm not sure I understand the ambiguity.
I asked that question because maybe everyone else's experience is different, but typically the person that would be inputting the content into Drupal would not be a content writer. and I'm a content strategist and I hear this and I'm like, ooh, I don't know that I would necessarily want that some of the prompts that are being used, I look at them and I'm like, wow, this would make this process much more efficient. But I guess from a governance perspective, where is that circled back to that human interaction being the content author that developed the content in the first place?
Yeah, so in cases where you've got content authors that are removed from the actual sort of like database creation of that content in the CMS, that's sort of a difficult one. I mean, I in some ways, because even like Google Docs has AI tools built in, that I might be tempted to say, let's, as an organization, standardize on prompts that we're going to use to generate summaries within some of those tools, so that by the time it gets to the person who's putting it into the CMS, the actual author has a summary that they're happy with. Because I'm not sure that the person who's responsible for just copying and pasting should be the person to judge whether or not the AI result is in line with what they'd be happy with. So a bit of nuance there. I would say the goal should really be to get the CMS easy enough to use that it doesn't require that extra step, but that's a bit of a tangent, I guess, from a development standpoint. Question over here?
Sure. I was going to say we've been deep in tags right now, and one of the things we ran was a usability study on content owners, their consistency in tag selection, and we couldn't get more than a 50% agreement. It was incredibly low. So we're really looking forward to AI, because I think it would give whatever the algorithm is, it's going to give us a more consistent tagging structure across the site. I was shocked at how low the human agreement was, even when some tags echoed the header. So they weren't even necessarily having to read the document to identify the tags.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I've certainly seen sites where you get tags that are almost identical, but like sometimes they've used like contracted a little part of it, or there's a period at the end, or like some very minor differences where any person would look at that and go, those are the same tag. But a Drupal CMS is so literal that like one character off and it treats it as a brand new tag.
Ours was even more specific than that, because they had multiple select.
Yep.
So they weren't even hand keying them. So I would imagine the hand keying would make it even less agreement.
Yeah. So definitely as part of the configuration of what we've just seen, you have the ability to say, don't allow new tags to be generated, only accept suggestions that are part of that existing set of tags as well. So that can definitely help with that for sure. I think there's a question at the back.
Yeah, I might have a follow-up, but talk about AI agent. So like, is one AI agent, for example, that summary that you just demoed, is that like considered an AI agent?
So in terms of what constitutes an agent, I would say typically it would be probably a more complex use case. I mean, what we saw is really taking one set of information, wrapping that in a prompt, sending it back, and then providing the response either in kind of a modal where the user can sort of make a manual choice of like, yes, that's acceptable, or maybe no, that isn't. Actually, that reminds me, there's a couple of other things that we could actually show here while we're in our example. If we go back in here, there is also some CK editor integration. So you can have things in here, and again, these are all sort of like configurations to whether or not you want to give this to your authors, but the ability to sort of like generate content with prompts directly in here, so giving them the power to sort of create their own prompts from scratch. Or you could do more of a like maybe modify with prompts. So maybe we say, I'm not quite happy with this paragraph, so let me provide a prompt again from scratch to be able to do that. I would say if you're dealing with more technical users, or maybe users that have been more trained up specifically on AI, that would be a good way to go. But more commonly, what I would see is people wanting to do something like say, let me highlight some content and then say, make that more professional. And again, this example is actually using a taxonomy, so you can have those predefined in terms of what are the tone values that they can use. And then in the same way, if you wanted to like translate, you can have it do either a taxonomy or even the languages that you actually have enabled on the site, which probably in a lot of cases is going to be a better approach as well. In terms of coming back to your question, we're going to see an example later on of something that's probably closer to what I would consider an agent in terms of like the level of complexity being higher. So hopefully by the end that's clear, but if not, let me know and we'll try and sort of spell that out more explicitly if that's okay. All right, quick time check. Let's go ahead and go back into our slides here. So there is this thing called Drupal CMS. Who's not heard of Drupal CMS? Okay, good. Well, yeah, that idea of having a more robust out of the box experience of using Drupal, and certainly AI as I think one of the most exciting future directions for Drupal is part of that, and something that you can sort of easily start to use and really get the full sense of what capabilities are available for using AI in Drupal. And so for that, we're going to go right back into our demo and sort of see here. So actually in the background, one of the things I have enabled is the logging that you can have. So again, as you start to go through that process of seeing what you get back and wanting to understand, is it the prompt, or is there some later processing in Drupal that maybe isn't doing quite what I want? Using the logging allows you to see what was the prompt that was actually sent to the LLM, and then exactly what was sent back. But more importantly, in the foreground here, we have this Drupal agent chatbot. Again, this is sort of a built-in capability. If you install Drupal CMS and enable or apply the AI recipe, you're going to see this. So when you open it up, it's going to say, introduce itself, and you just say, what can you do? And it can say, basically give you sort of a brief rundown of all of the different things that it's able to do. I think what I heard is that there's over 20 different agents that it has built in underneath, and so those have specific understandings of different parts of the actual Drupal CMS, and so can do things like create content types and create fields. So we could say something in natural language. So say I want to post movie reviews with a description and rating out of 5 stars. So again, very natural language. I haven't said anything about Drupalisms like content types or fields or any of those kinds of things, but I have been careful to be specific about the kinds of information that I want to be able to post. And so what it's going to do is go out and come up with suggestions. So it thinks it needs to create a content type, which I would say is the correct approach. It's going to suggest adding a description field and a rating field, both of which seem perfect. Some iterations of this I've seen, it'll actually come back and say, I can guide you through it, or I can do it for you. So it actually gives you the opportunity to have it train you, which I think is also pretty exciting. So again, for people completely new to Drupal, the AI chatbot can be a way to sort of help train them up to better understanding some of these concepts. But in this case, we'll just say, do it for me. And now what we can see is behind the scenes, what the chatbot is doing is actually contacting some of the agents that are doing that deeper work. So it's calling a content type agent that's going to create the content type, and then it's calling a different field agent that's going to go ahead and add these 2 different fields to that newly created content type. So we'll give it a minute here. Interwebs are slow today.
Is all of this in core?
Question is all of this in core? So not in core, but in Drupal CMS. So which, that's a bit of a semantic discussion. I feel like more and more as a community, when we talk about Drupal as a product, we're actually talking about Drupal CMS. So what's in core is probably less relevant from that standpoint. But yeah, if you were to start by using Drupal CMS, you'd have all of this available. Okay, so it's come back, it's set up the content type and fields for all of those, and so if we were to go, notice that it's done this asynchronously, so we don't see the ability to create that movie review yet. But if we go back, let's say to our home page, basically reload the page, you can see that we have the ability to go ahead and create our movie reviews. So it's done that as a plain text. Again, we could probably go back to the chat and say, make that a full text field or formatted text field, so that we can apply different formatting and add links and some of those other things. But you have that ability now to do, in a conversational way, actually build out your content architecture, which again I think is pretty exciting. I see a question here.
So that's a very powerful tool.
Yep.
Is it within Is it within the ability to restrict what the AI can do per
Per user?
missing the word, yeah, like per the proper user security levels and stuff like that. So
It's a good question. I'm not 100% sure if you can do sort of like role-based prompting in a way, like within all of those more specific capabilities, you have the ability again to sort of go in and adjust what are the actual prompts that it's using to do some of those things.
Right.
I'm pretty sure out of the box that it doesn't have the ability to be destructive. So if you ever said like, no, I decided I don't want that rating field, it actually can't remove that field, but it will say I can tell you the steps so that you can go ahead and delete that. So there are some things built in to make it non-destructive, but in terms of some of those other things, I would say you probably want to have different things that can be done and then make those restricted by role, as opposed to saying the same thing will work in different ways based on who the user is, which I feel like from a support standpoint could turn into a nightmare as well. So.
Thank you. I think that was actually a better way of me phrasing the question that I was trying to ask.
Oh, okay.
So thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So coming back to that question about agents, here's an example of something that's fairly new with the AI project. So a lot of people may be familiar with ECA as something that's been in the Drupal community for a few years now, but has this really powerful BPMN visual interface for building out logic. In the case of sort of ECA, typically for sort of workflow-based ways of having kind of custom business logic built into your website. But now you can use that same interface to actually build out agentic workflows. So in this case saying, when somebody triggers this specific agent, it now has different sub-agents that can go and call to do more specific pieces of the overall thing that we're trying to do. So you can see here, you can talk about the maximum number of times it can loop through the entire process, give it some instructions, tell it what tools to use. And then if we go sort of a level deeper within some of these things, for a specific, in this case, the field agent, we can see we've got these different steps that it can follow. Again, we can say for this particular step, what's the maximum number of times you can iterate, give it lots of detailed instructions, kind of like a nested prompt there, and tell it what are the different tools that it can use within that. And then there is actually sort of a different kind of more visual way of sort of seeing that nested list of things. And so I think this sort of very visual way of being able to define that much more complex agent logic is really something that is going to set Drupal apart, certainly within kind of the web CMS world. And to some degree, I think the combination of having both this kind of visual agent builder tool, but also the sort of built-in interface layer of a CMS potentially also sets it apart from tools like N8N that may be out there that are great for sort of just the agentic piece, but lack sort of the direct interaction piece that Drupal provides. So let's talk a little bit about the AI initiative, which is something that was started earlier this year, and I think it's definitely exciting because it's already brought together some of the top people that have been operating in this space, but really trying to make sure that we have not just enthusiasm, but the actual means to achieve the kinds of innovation that Drupal really needs to set itself apart in the space. So as an example already, there's over $100,000 in operational funding. And then each of the people that have stepped forward to be sponsors of this initiative also need to commit to providing full-time employees so that we actually have kind of the hands-on keyboards that are going to make these things more than just ideas, but actually innovations that people can start using to build different kinds of AI-based applications. So there's a whole vision statement here. I'm obviously not going to read all of this, but a couple of things that I thought were pretty interesting. So this idea of democratizing AI-powered digital experiences. So really making it focus not just on sort of like, what's the word I want to say, ruthless efficiency at the expense of the people that might otherwise be creating the content, but really creating experiences that keep people in the loop and use it as a way to sort of augment their capabilities. And that goes into the next one, enhance human creativity rather than replace it. So it's really sort of keeping the people at the center of those AI experiences And then the last one that I thought was interesting here is Drupal will set the standard for ethical, powerful, and accessible AI. So certainly ethical and accessible, I feel like aren't necessarily terms that you hear a lot in AI conversations. So the fact that that's part of the AI initiative's vision statement, I think, is pretty interesting. There are some specific areas that they call out in terms of where they envision providing capabilities within this AI initiative. So certainly content generation as well as translation and localizations. We've already seen examples of those. But being able to do page building. So to be able to say, I want a landing page for this topic, and maybe even say, here are a couple of examples of pages that I think would be a good fit for what I want. And then having something that could go into, let's say, Experience Builder and actually generate out a landing page for you. I think there's some pretty interesting capabilities there. So things like intelligent journey design as well, getting into sort of more designer experience. I feel like for a lot of folks, Figma to Drupal sort of integration or automation is something that people have really wanted for a long time, and there's definitely the potential for AI-based tools to sort of make that process more automated. As well, one of the things that LLMs are amazing at is sort of pattern recognition, and that's actually how they achieve a lot of things that they do. And so from that standpoint, you could have an AI that could look at your design system and actually identify what are the things that are actually kind of outliers of the overall pattern of the design system, and sort of help you to highlight places where your design system could be more cohesive. And then potentially being able to integrate with additional tools. So as an example, beyond just tools that are already sort of web focused, like let's say Figma, potentially being able to take some kind of, let's say, a component design that was created in a tool like Illustrator that has no opinion about sort of web or anything else, and being able to turn that into a component that now content creators can use as part of their sort of intuitive content creation. From developer and engineering experience, obviously, in addition to things that the AI initiative is working on, there's lots of exciting tools out there like Cursor AI and Windsurf and some of these other tools that are really excellent for generating Drupal code. But some of the things that they're talking about, certainly already there's a lot of model flexibility, so being able to work with all kinds of different models, as well as even among the LLMs, like we've already got ChatGPT 5 support built in. There's this idea of integration with more and more kind of enterprise tools, so that, again, because Drupal tends to be used more for the ambitious sites, being able to work with, whether it's like ERP systems or some of these other things, definitely would also be incredibly powerful. Being able to better manage like prompts as something that are more reusable, as opposed to like necessarily baked into like configurations for specific fields and some of those things, as well as kind of overall governance and control. So maybe like visibility on how many times people are using specific tools, some of those kinds of things as well. And then again, coming back to that idea of agents, here's an initial diagram that has captured some of the thinking going into specific capabilities that could be provided by specifically tuned agents. And just looking through this list, you could sort of get an idea of the power that could be achieved by getting some of these implemented as well. So hopefully by now, some of you are excited enough that you want to get involved, particularly in the AI initiative. So there is this webpage, new.drupal.org/AI, where you can get a lot more information, including things like upcoming webinars, also view the recording from past webinars. There is a form on there where you can sign up for newsletters that will let you know when new webinars are going to be, or as new developments happen. And then there is also a channel in Drupal Slack, AI-initiative, where you can go in and sort of keep up to date on what's going on in there. So a few final thoughts. In terms of general best practices, again, definitely lean into that Drupal AI ecosystem. There are still some of those other projects around, but I would say if they're not connected to the AI project in some way, there's probably a high likelihood that over time they're going to sort of wither in terms of their overall usage. Think about, particularly in an agentic context, are there opportunities to chain together different LLMs so that you can use each of them for the things that they're best at? So maybe instead of just taking the article text and dumping that to your image generation LLM, you want to send it to a different one first to say, give me a more robust prompt that now you pass to the one that's actually doing the image generation, and then oftentimes that can give you a better result. Definitely, at all times, you want to keep a human in the loop. And then also, another best practice to consider is restricting AI tools to a container. I don't know if everybody heard, but there was something a few weeks ago about a developer who realized that AI had basically dumped his production database. And then when he asked the AI about it, it at first sort of denied it, and then eventually sort of fessed up, which I thought was amazing. But one of the things that I like to think about is treat AI like an intern. So in the same way that you wouldn't hire somebody out of college and give them access to your production database, you really shouldn't be giving AI access to your production database. So really try and think about you have the responsibility to give it some oversight. AI can be the most intelligent intern you've ever worked with, but it's still an intern. It will often lack some very basic common sense, and that's where you have responsibility as the person. Again, going back to that other session, AI should be your assistant, not your author. So definitely review that session as well for sort of some deeper discussion, I think, around this particular topic. But overall, I would say Drupal and AI can be a really magical combination. Last thing I'll say, Amazy has a lot of tools about AI. So if you go to amazy.ai, there is a link on that page where you can actually try out some Drupal-specific tools that they have. And Drupal Forge actually has basically a containerized environment. You can spin up an instance of Drupal CMS with the AI recipe applied, and I think they even give you $1 worth of AI credits, so you can not do a ton of things, but at least get a feel for how some of those tools work. They actually have something that they've just announced that's actually government specific. So if you go to their booth, you can sort of talk to them and learn more about that. And then Marcus, who does a lot of the work, particularly from the Freely Give organization, has this amazing website called Workflows of AI, where he writes posts about some use cases where automation using AI can be really helpful. There are a few people from the initiative that also post YouTube videos, so that can be a good way to sort of stay up to date as well. But with that, I will open it up for any other questions. Yes.
First, I want to thank you for your session. It's really very, very good job.
Great.
The question, I'm not a big fan of CK Editor. How long before AI just replaces CK Editor?
Oh, interesting question. How long before AI replaces CK Editor?
Can't wait for that day.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's some combination of Experience Builder and AI that could replace CK Editor, but I feel like there's a lot of formatting things that people want to do within CK Editor that currently I don't really see AI being able to do all of that, or necessarily even being the right tool for the job for some of those things. But I suppose it depends on what content formatting or entry looks like for you and how you need to do that. At the back.
I was experimenting with an AI agent that generated charts and contributed that, but I did notice this with OpenAI with Claude. I noticed I did one generation and it charged me price like that. And so I could see some of you could have a lot of tokens going into this. And so do you know, is anyone estimating to make this content type that's going to be 75 cents if you do it through AI versus by hand?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think probably, again, we talked about within the AI initiative that sort of that governance and control piece. I feel like, if anything, probably that could be part of that. So that idea of saying, before I do this thing, what's it going to cost you? Obviously, it's going to have to know not just what it thinks is the step to follow, but which model you're using, what's the current pricing for that. So there's probably some things that are non-trivial in there. But I could definitely see that as something that there's going to be a lot of appetite, because, as you say, for sort of anecdotal use of some of these tools, it's not significant. But once you start to apply some of these tools at an enterprise scale, it can definitely add up. Yeah.
And now, just off of that, you mentioned there was around 22 LLMs, the AI, Drupal AI.
I mean, like a lot of people, probably the one that I've used the most is OpenAI, just because it's sort of the one that everybody has. The organization that I work for, Acquia, like we have a shared account that we use, and so for me that's just sort of the easiest one. I've definitely been meaning to play around with some open source ones that I've heard good things about, ones that I could potentially run locally so that, information that I'm passing in doesn't necessarily get used to train other things or show up in other people's prompts. But yeah, I mean, I would say just from a sort of, get started standpoint, that seems to be the one where a lot of people start, but I wouldn't say is necessarily the best one. It's, what I would encourage people to do over time is just experiment with different ones and figure out which ones seem to be the best for the different kinds of tasks that you're trying to do. Any other questions? Yes.
The advice to AI as your assistant and not your author makes a lot of sense, but it's tricky to think of in the context of not granting production database, not allowing the AI in the production database to enable. So in a workflow where editors are saying to get to generate alt text, what does that look like? Like, how do you provide an editorial workflow that actually keep that attack surface small?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly again, to the degree that you can, as we showed in the demo, really make sure that AI can suggest the alt text, but it's still the person's responsibility to save it.
You're the human in the loop.
Right, exactly. Be the human in the loop so that ultimately it's your responsibility to sort of accept or reject what AI provides. And then that way it's still your responsibility, but AI can help you to be more efficient in that work.
And this is more general, and this question is like more broad. Let's scope it as a community. But what do you personally feel like we gain, and what do you feel like we gain as a community?
So I feel like there's the potential for AI to be able to do a lot of the work. Well, number one, so the simple example is summary, right? Like I feel like a lot of us who have been in Drupal for a long time have built websites where we wanted to display, let's say, a teaser with a summary, and basically almost never would people actually take the time to write a teaser. So you can actually, there's the potential for AI to help us realize the kinds of online experiences that we were always trying to build, but that content editors really didn't have sort of like the time, or maybe in some cases the training to actually sort of like do the work that was required to deliver that experience. So I feel like there's an opportunity for some of those website experiences to actually realize their potential, as well as for things that people should be doing, but again, either are too starved for time, they've got too much on their plate to sort of do those, to at least give them the opportunity to make sure that those things actually get done, but with a significantly less effort. In terms of things that we're losing by using AI, I mean, obviously there's lots of concerns around environmental impacts. Privacy is another big one. Another thing that I've heard a lot of discussion about lately is, again, thinking back to the idea of treating AI as an intern. There are actually interns that are not being hired because companies are leaning so heavily into AI. And I think there's some ethical considerations around, as a society, if we're not hiring people out of school to the degree that we used to be, where does that put us in 5 years, in 10 years, right? So there's broader discussions, and some of those are happening, but I would love to see higher levels of engagement around sort of thinking through the implications of how we're using those to replace some of the existing ways some of that work is being done today. Any other questions? One in the back?
Some of those questions that came up about what LLM to use, or how do you get started to make some decisions, or any of those resources you have, kind of maybe target some of that, because that's a question we have locally where, yeah, that's great, there's a module, we've got some use cases, but during the QA and testing part of it, how do we really get a handle on, what is this cost, and how much am I benefiting from having this automation happen in Drupal versus having users, which they're likely doing now, they're just going to the web and making those prompts online. So is there any any recommendations on, how do I evaluate this at a very smaller scale so that I can get hey, proof of concept, this makes sense, but it's not going to cost us all this money once I turn on this LLM and people are just going, gangbusters using these things.
It sounds like the question is really around advice on maybe running like a pilot project to sort of evaluate, efficiency versus cost, those kinds of things. I mean, to me, trying to structure something as a pilot project where you get enough data to have a sense of like realistically what's the cost of this approach, and then try and layer in like the qualitative how do people feel like that was used. There are some studies where they've said coders as an example who use AI for certain kinds of tasks spend a lot less time writing code, but then spend more time debugging code. And so it's sometimes not 100% clear, like, is that actually a net win, particularly if then you layer on the cost of, the actual queries. So I think it's really about sort of, as you say, like trying different tools for the same things to find which is the best one. Then maybe expanding the scope to more of a pilot project where you say, like, let's scale it up and see if those things actually do translate, across like maybe a larger team or some of those other things. And then at that point also you have a better sense of like what would the cost be if we start to ramp that up. That's probably the best I could say. Yeah.
I was going to recommend, you had it on there, like we started with Hugging Face, and if you're just getting into this and want to do your own LLMs, it was a great way to find cheap GPUs and documentation, and it's just an awesome resource.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. Hugging Face.
How to get to that Chatbots, the Drupal chatbot?
You're talking about like this one?
Yeah.
So if you install the Chatbot module, which is one of the sub-modules of the AI project, then basically anywhere on the site, it'll do that. It places it as a block. So you have the ability, again, through the configuration to say maybe you only want it to show in specific parts of the site or some of those kinds of things, but you can configure it that way. All right, I think we're past time, so I should probably stop the recording, but thank you everyone.